Well, I'm really excited to introduce our two speakers tonight. We have two. First, I want to introduce Shelly Kelly. She is a certified archivist with a master's degree in applied history. Kelly began her archival career at Galveston and Texas History Center, which is located in Galveston's Rosenberg Library, where she worked closely with 1900 storm collections and researchers. She has co-edited an award-winning book on the notorious hurricane titled Through a Night of Horrors, Voices from the 1900 Galveston Storm, and her archival outreach on the subject was recognized with a national award from the Society of American Archivists. Since 2020, Shelly has worked as an independent researcher, writer, and oral history consultant. Shelly's going to come up and give us a presentation on the storm of 1900. She is going to be followed by Judge Branick. Judge Jeff Branick is a former attorney and partner in Provost Humphrey Law Firm. He has served as an elected county judge of Jefferson County since assuming office in 2011. Over the past 14 years, he has worked tirelessly on coastal erosion project and hurricane storm surge protection for coastal residents. Judge Branick has helped lead the county through several hurricanes and disasters, and he will share his considerable insight into the importance of storm preparedness. So just to give you kind of the run of show here, Shelly Kelly's going to come up. She's going to give her presentation. Judge Branick's going to follow immediately without an additional introduction, and then if we have time at the end, we'll take questions. So at this point in time, I would like to thank and introduce Shelly Kelly.
Good evening, everyone. How are y'all tonight? I'm so glad that you could come out. I can actually see your faces. You know, all the little fourth graders before were just a little bit small. Let's see. There we go. So, there we are. I like to start by just putting up some of the words of how our 1900 storm survivors began their letters. If you can't read it in the back, I'll let you know. It begins like this: "My dear mother, I know you are anxious to hear from me. To all at home, very probably you little expect to get a letter from me here, but I am alive and without a scratch. Dear Jenny, within this past week, I have passed through the most trying experience of my life. My dear girl, I will begin by saying I am alive and unscratched. Dear sisters and cousins, we are all well and alive, thank God." The Rosenberg Library is home to a vast array of resources about the 1900 Galveston storm, primary sources like letters, memoirs, oral histories, photographs, newspapers, and yes, even the mortuary book where all of the many of the recorded deaths were placed. And since that time, there have been many published books. The first round started shortly after the storm in October of 1900. There were publishers actually found in the newspapers where they had advertisements asking journalists to go down to the island and collect any stories on the street they could get and bring them back. So the publications that came out are very hastily prepared, rambling, lurid accounts, primarily intent on cashing in on the nation's most immediate interest in this storm. Today we would call it clickbait, and back then we'd probably call it yellow journalism. We question highly the veracity of many of these accounts. Since that time, though, there have been quite a number of both historical fiction and nonfiction books about the 1900 storm. Of the books published from 1955 to the present, two of possibly the best-known titles are both from journalists. The 1955 book, A Weekend in September by John Edward Weems, a journalist who went and interviewed survivors of the storm personally. His notes that he took are all recorded in the Rosenberg Library, of course. And before he published this book, he actually printed out a draft, and anything that pertained to that individual, he mailed it to them, along with a self-addressed stamped envelope or postcard in which he invited them to say approved. So they all approved their story as it's put. That is my favorite book on the 1900 storm, other than the one we did. The other one everybody seems to know is Isaac's Storm by Eric Larson, also a journalist. and his has been very popular. Tonight, all of the things I will be reading from or talking about come from this. This is Through a Night of Horrors. This is the book that myself and Casey Edward Green edited together. It came about because a lot of students were writing to the Rosenberg Library, lots of reference requests, interested in primary source materials for the National History Day project. If you're not familiar with National History Day, it's kind of like the science fair we give them. It's national. They get a theme for the year, and they have to do some type of a project. I won't go into all the details, but you can go to nhd.org and look it up. It's fantastic. I didn't look to see if Jefferson County has one, but I expect that they do. The students were emailing us because in 1995, 6, 7, 8, we didn't have a website and we didn't have social media. There was no way to promote all of these things online. The only way to get them was to write to an archives and ask for a copy. So we were constantly Xeroxing the same accounts over and over, and I went to Casey Green and said, hey, what if we just took all the ones that I'm sending all the time, went down to the print shop and had them make it, put a little spiral binding on it. Instead of charging $5 for me to do 30 minutes worth of research, I can just sell it to them for 15 and, work smarter, not harder, right? And he took it up to the executive director, who said, well, hang on, I know people. And lo and behold, we ended up publishing Through a Night of Horrors through Texas A&M University Press. So it is a book that presents the survivors' accounts in their own words. We don't try to massage it or put it into a narrative. We just let you read what they wrote. And I think that's very powerful, especially today when everybody wants to put their own spin on something. Now, I'm going to begin just very briefly, very quickly highlighting Galveston as it was in 1900. In 1900, Galveston was the 4th largest city in Texas. It was a very busy deep-water port full of seagoing ships, providing 14 direct steamship lines to Europe, 3 to Cuba, remember we had just had the Spanish-American War, and 1 to Mexico. And then, I couldn't believe this, there are 2 lines that go to Japan and the Far East. Think of that, from Galveston. I wonder how long that trip would have taken. And that's all, of course, in addition to the regular domestic ports. Earlier in the year, the Southern Pacific Railroad had announced that Galveston had been selected as the main eastern terminus servicing Texas and all states west of Mississippi. They'd already started construction on the wharf front, and they were adding grade for the new rail lines to come in. All of that was already in place. So Galveston had a big, bright future ahead of it. In 1900, Galveston and New Orleans were locked in an ever annual battle of who would be the nation's largest cotton port. And I think Galveston was the 1899, and New Orleans had just edged them out in 1900, but Galveston was on track to yank back that title. Galveston handled over 60% of all of Texas cotton crop. They also ranked nationally in exporting wheat, cattle, and corn. I said I'd be quick. Downtown Galveston thrived with all kinds of international and national business headquarters. I like that picture because you've got that nice wide view. But in addition to the shipping business, it was a major banking center. A modern metropolitan city. Was the first city in Texas to have electricity, the first to have telephones, and the second for streetcars. So I don't know how Houston beat us out on that one. Galveston enjoyed such prosperity that later historians would name her the Wall Street of the Southwest. And note I say later historians. They did not call Galveston the Wall Street of the Southwest in 1900. That's a phrase that was coined, I think, by Gary Cartwright in later histories about the island. The 1900 census was published, the total of the 1900 census was published about a day or two before the storm, if you look in the Galveston newspaper, and it reported proudly that there were 37,789 residents of the city. Now, of course, there were more than that on September 8th. It was the weekend after Labor Day, and school wouldn't start for another 2 weeks because they started later then. And there were lots of people down on the island from outside the city. Galveston was the third richest city in proportion to its population in the United States. Just think about that for a second. Banking, shipping, headquarters, and all these mansions. Now, of course, you probably recognize the Bishop's Palace. It's still there, but if you can see all the way down Broadway, there's more and more homes and houses. Earlier in the year, they had just dedicated the Texas Hero Monument on April 21st, San Jacinto Day. It's one of several projects that was funded by the benefactor Henry Rosenberg in his will. The other one you probably would think of is the Rosenberg Library, of course. The first free public library in Texas, in Texas, sorry. The homes that, wrong slide. The homes that we know today as Ashton Villa, Moody Mansion, the Bishop's Palace, as I mentioned, did not stand alone. They shared the block. Now, Galveston was not all wealth and grandeur of the East End. There were middle-class and working-class families and neighborhoods scattered across in the city. It's one of the nice things, the island, there's only so much real estate, and so no matter where you're going to have neighbors living next to neighbors. The eastern edge of the city, several of you might recognize this building here. That's Ashbel Smith Building, or Old Red. But the eastern edge had a medical school and hospital, both of which are still there. And then on the west, around 50th Street, were the new government fortifications at Fort Crockett. Now, near Fort Crockett, there was a new modern neighborhood called the Denver Resurvey. And if you continued west, about 63rd Street today, you would run into St. Mary's Orphanage. And then if you pass that, you go into just a bunch of sandy, scrubby prairie where dairy farms dot the land and provided the fresh milk and eggs to the city every morning. For entertainment, in addition to the Grand Opera House that was 6 years old at the time of the storm downtown, visitors were primarily attracted to the rolling Gulf surf on these beaches where they had grand bathhouses available. I love this picture. This is the Pagoda Bathhouse. It was the one in the previous picture. That one is also. And I love this one because you can see the cistern here where they catch the fresh rainwater. And then this here is the pagodas, and you can see down here the rolling bathhouses where they would enter, change their clothes, and then emerge and could rent them. But we're going to start here at the Levy Building, located on 23rd and Market Street, because the Levy Building was home to the offices and on the roof the weather instruments for the U.S. Weather Bureau. And for the past 11 years, the Galveston office was led by the very respected and experienced Dr. Isaac Klein. He was assisted by a staff that included his younger brother Joseph as just a weather observer. And we do have the Galveston Weather Bureau records available at the Rosenberg Library, and they document the various reportings that they were receiving in the week prior to the storm. Now, one of the things I didn't realize at the beginning when I first started doing the storm was Monday before the storm was Labor Day. And so this happened just right after that. There's all these documents of the parade for Labor Day and all the cotton screwjammers and all the associations and unions coming out and marching. But here we just get a glimpse of the Weather Bureau records. These are documented in the book by Isaac Klein and his staff. The first advisory reading came on Tuesday, September 4th, that there was a tropical disturbance moving northward. And then mid-morning on Wednesday, they received another message on the bottom down here that it's central near Key West. And then on Thursday in the early afternoon, they received yet another advisory message regarding the tropical storm central over southern Florida. Now on Friday, Isaac Klein wrote that they made special observations at noon and at 3. They did receive an order to hoist a storm flag that he wrote in the records at 10:30, and they had it up 5 minutes later. And he personally observed rough seas with heavy southeast swells in the afternoon and in the evening. Now, I know a lot of people talk today about how Galveston just wasn't prepared for a storm, but I'm going to talk for just a minute about why we think that's not the case. Because I'm curious, what do our survivors remember or say in their immediate letters after the storm or in the few years after about, did they know there was a storm coming? What did they do? What did they not do? So we're going to take a minute and look at that. John Blagden is from Minnesota. He's down in Galveston as a temporary assignment to the Weather Bureau. Somebody else is out. I forget the reason why. He wrote the very first letter after the storm. He wrote it on Monday, September 10th. And in that, he told them, "We had warning of the storm, and many saved themselves by seeking safety before the storm reached here. We were busy all day Friday answering telephone calls about it and advising people to prepare for danger. But the storm was more severe than we expected." James Brown was a dairy manager down the island. He wrote to his family afterwards, "Nothing previous to denote any storm coming, only the usual warning from the signal station, which no one notices." And then we have Louisa Rolfing. She's a middle-class wife and mother, and she was probably close to her late 70s, and she wrote her memoirs for her children. And she wrote that during the night of September 8th, the wind was blowing very strong, and reports of a storm in the Gulf were heard. But no one was alarmed more than at any other time when we heard these reports. Everybody went about their business the same way as on any other Saturday. Many of the letters and memoirs reference the storm flag and knowing that flag was flying and not paying much attention to it or not realizing how severe it would be. Galveston was not a stranger to storms, high tides, overflows, especially the vulnerable eastern tip. That eastern edge was particularly low for an island that was 8.7 feet higher than sea level at its highest point, somewhere around 25th and Broadway. But it's hard to imagine for us today because we live with instantaneous information. We have seconds-old radar. We can pull up our phones and look anything up. We've got social media. And it's hard to put yourself back in 1900 when they're relying on telephones, telegraphs. Maybe the reports do come in, don't come in. Sometimes the information's already 2 or 3 hours old. Then it goes to the newspaper, and the newspaper has to lay the type and print it and distribute it. And by the time you're reading the newspaper the next morning or that paper the afternoon, your information's already somewhere between 12 and 24 hours old. Where is the storm? What do they know? So I think about it from time to time. Multiple warnings disregarded. Why? Because they think it's going to be no worse than the last big storm that they had, the last big overflow. People think they know what to expect, but I promise you, no one could have predicted or expected the magnitude of this storm at this time. A journalist did write his own memoirs. They do read a little bit like he's writing for a newspaper, but they're his memoirs. And he wrote that there had been high waters before, notably in 1875, 25 years earlier, and 1886, 14 years earlier, when the effect was mainly discomfort and wrecked fences. For years, he wrote, the physical geographers had argued plausibly, supported by experience, that the high water records were the maximum of possibility because the beach at Galveston slopes so gently to the ocean depths that the destructive waves would be dissipated before reaching shore. Scientists who make hypotheses, who test with experiments, who gather scientific data and information that they seek to prove or disprove their hypothesis, were in agreement with this. They were about to be proven wrong, deadly wrong. I'd also like to point out that Galveston was a growing city. So the population in the last 20 years before the storm had increased over 41%. And over 23% of that, more than half, was just in that last 10 years. So more than 23% of the island had never even been through what they had in 1886. And those two storms he mentioned, in 1875, the recorded wind speed in Galveston was 45 miles per hour with a 6-foot storm surge. Do we do anything anymore at 40, 45 miles an hour? In 1886, it was 65 miles per hour. That would catch your attention, and an 8-foot storm surge. So anyone who'd been there in 1875 and 1886, how would you dream of a storm more than twice that strength? Today we have 21st century technology, 24/7 weather coverage. We have no excuse to ignore the warnings that come. And we know that if the Weather Channel sends Jim Cantori to our location, things are about to get serious, right? So, but in 1900, they didn't have Jim Cantori. They had Isaac Klein. That's a slide. Oh, I meant to have it on that. Sorry, y'all. We had Isaac Klein. Isaac Klein, who went out every morning very early and observed the weather and was about to have his hypothesis completely disproven. He does report in his records that at 7 a.m., such high water with opposing winds never observed previously. For tourists and for visitors, the first indications they had came on Saturday morning when the people were coming into town from the beach reporting that the water was up as far as Avenue M on 21st Street and that the streetcars had quit running. Gee, I wonder why the streetcars had quit running. The Galveston, they actually were starting to break up. The Galveston newspaper was delivered twice a day. There was a morning paper called the Daily News, and there was an evening paper called the Tribune. The Galveston Tribune did go to press on September 8th in the afternoon, and it is one of two known accounts that was written during the storm. Other than this, everything we have is either before or after, not during. There is a copy available online through the Texas Portal of Texas History, and you can go and look at it there, and you can zoom in so you can read all the articles. But I wanted to point out a couple things. They say right here, if you can read it, that the tropical storm came ashore and drove the water ashore. So they're acting like it's already happened and it's past. As of 3 o'clock, when I read all of these articles, that's the last time they give. So I know this went to press after that in as much time as it took them to write the local reports and to set the type. So probably what, between 4 and 5 they were printing this paper? As of 3 o'clock, the newspaper reports the storm predicted came ashore overnight and is doing considerable damage. The Gulf is causing flooding and damaging along the shoreline on the east, and the high tidal waves on the bay side is tearing up the wharves. In fact, it was ripping out all of the brand new wharves the Southern Pacific Railroad had just put into place. Furniture vans, wagons, drays, every kind of vehicle has been pressed into service to move not only the household furniture, but also members of the household to places of safety. You mean people whose homes were beginning to flood just from the early stages of the storm were evacuating? Yeah, they were. So we know that people were doing things. They weren't just waiting it out. And then amid cotton market and shipping reports, there are little local notices like this one that says, "Look out for live wires." They're telling people, hey, electric lines are down. City water has been shut off because of the high water. The fire department and the patrol wagons are now rescuing residents east of 8th and south of Broadway in skiffs. And as of 3 o'clock, we expect continued wind and high water through the night as the storm passes. They even have a great little mention that there's a house that caught on fire, and they had to just let it burn out on the east end because the fire trucks could not get through the high water to put the fire out. Now, I mentioned that the Tribune was one of two known pieces. This is the other one. And it is an anonymous letter. It is unsigned. We don't know if it was written by a man or a woman. What we do know, and I don't remember how exactly, is that it was written somewhere in the medical, we think it was written over by Old Red, somewhere in the hospital area. The words are the only clues to the writer's identity. And I am going to read this because it's a wonderful letter and it's a little hard to read at a distance. A.M. It does not require a great stretch of the imagination to imagine this structure a shaky old boat out at sea. The whole thing rocking like a reef, surrounded by water, said water growing closer, ever closer. Have my hands full, quieting nervous women. 12 noon. Things beginning to look serious. Water up to the first floor in the house. all over the basement of the hospital. Cornices, roofs, window lights, blinds flying in all directions. The scenes about here are distressing. Everything washed away. Poor people trying vainly to save their bedding and clothing. Methinks the poor nurses will be trying to save their beds in short order. Now flames in the distance. Our beautiful bay, a raging torrent. 3 p.m. I'm beginning to feel a weakening desire for something to cling to. Should feel more comfortable in the embrace of your arms. You hold yourself in readiness to come to us, should occasion demand. Darkness is overwhelming us to add to the horror. Dearest, I reach out my hand to you, my heart, my soul. This is the 1900 iteration of the Tremont Hotel. It's not the same Tremont Hotel you would see today. But several thousand people on the East End found refuge here in this hotel, with about 200 paying guests. We know from some letters written by traveling salesmen what happened at this hotel. And I'll just summarize it rather than reading it. But the wind blew the hotel roof off. The bricks and stones were blown about like feathers. The people huddled in the central hallways in total darkness. They could not go into the rooms on the outside because all of the windows had blown out. The water rose 7 feet in the street, creeped up into the first floor of the hotel until it stood 3.5 feet. And you can see how it's up off the ground here. And the only thing that could be heard was the howling wind, and over that occasionally the crashing of buildings and parts of the hotel's exterior. Now, before we get really into this, I want to give you another lesson that we've learned from the storm. And that is that many of these firsthand accounts mention people helping people, both during and after the storm. People opened their doors. They risked their life to bring people in off the streets or to rescue them as they were floating by in the waves. And while I don't have time to go into all of the great detail, I'm going to mention a few examples, and I'll leave it here because I love them cleaning up, helping each other. 15-year-old Harry Maxim was coming home from his job downtown, and he comes in and says, he wrote later, "Upon entering the house, I was surprised to find it full of our neighbors, some friends and some strangers. Mother, in her usual thoughtful way, had opened our house to anyone who wanted to come in. Before the storm was over, we had about 100 people in our house, men, women, and children. And Mother was constantly moving among them, offering all the help and comfort that she could." I'll give you another one. Our Spanish-American war veteran, in his mid to late 20s, I think, his name was Lloyd Failing. I love his account. You'll have to read it sometime. But he says, "I brought in a number of people from time to time who came by in the water. During the night, with the assistance of Dr. Baldinger and Dr. Nave, I brought in a total of 43 refugees." And the last one I'll leave you with is from Arnold Wolfram, who I just found out today is, I think, the great-grandfather of a podcast called Wise in Texas, Judge Ken Wise. He was making his way home in the mid-afternoon, and he recognized a 10-year-old boy who worked as a Western Union messenger boy. He saw him being swept away into the water, and he rushed and caught him, was safely able to take him with him. And they traversed a number of blocks through a very terrifying ordeal, and they eventually arrived safely at Wolfram's home. This is just a map that we used in the book to show you an idea of the devastation of Galveston Island. This is the downtown area here. This is the wharf front. This right here represents the wall of debris, the line of wreckage. Everything inside the city was, we'll say, more or less protected as you're going to get with 120 to 135 mile an hour winds, right? And flooding in the street from the bay side. But everything outside, all of this is completely destroyed. Now, I have one map for each section in the book, one for the letters, one for the memoirs, one for the oral histories. And the only thing that's different in the oral histories from the memoirs is that I have this many that are outside of the wall of wreckage. The majority of them are all right along here or they're inside the center. The hospitals were kind of up here. This was where everybody was evacuating from in the very beginning. I am often asked about my favorite story, to which I reply, that's kind of the wrong way to say it. But I'm going to tell you the one that stands out to me after all of these years. It's been over 25 years now since I started working on the storm. This was an oral history recorded sometime before February of 1966. And when I worked at the Rosenberg Library, I have a background in oral history. It was part of my master's work. And something I've been doing for a long time. I went through the oral history collection, found this cassette tape, and realized that she might have gone through the storm, and I wonder if there's something on it. And so I listened to it, and I started crying. And I transcribed it. And this is before we had AI and all the great online programs that you can use to transcribe things. This is back when you put the cassette in a tape recorder, you pushed the pedal, you listened on your ear, and you typed, and you left up. And it would go a couple of seconds, and you'd push in more. The lady who I'm going to talk about lived right here. Her name was Ellen Edwards. At the time of the storm, she was 19 years old, and tomorrow would be her 145th birthday. She was the youngest of 7 children, and they'd emigrated to Galveston from England when she was 3 years old. By the time of the storm, 1900, both of her parents had passed from illness, and all of her sisters were married, some with children. She remembers that the wind blew very hard on Friday. I already pointed out where they lived, on 44th and S. On Saturday morning at 8 a.m., her brother had worked nights, and so he comes home, and he brings with him their sister, Mary. She lives over here somewhere. Mary's got 2 children, a 2-year-old baby and an older child. And she's like, oh, with all the rain, you know, I was about to get worried about you, she says. Mary says, well, you should be worried because the water's already waist deep in my house on the east end. The whole family gathered here at Ellen's house. I don't know exactly off the top of my head who lived in the house at the time, but she had a sister. They were Irish twins. They were very close in age, like less than a year. But she had her other sister and her husband and their 5 children. She had her cousin and her cousin's wife, and there might have been other children there too. And they're all there, and the cousin suddenly bursts in the door, and he says, we got to get out of here. The bay is backed up. The water's meeting. And Ellen starts packing. She's 19 years old. She's the baby of the family. She starts packing. Well, we're going to need dry clothes wherever we go because we're going to go out in that weather, and let me pack something up. And her older sister, being the older sister, says, no, Ellen, I'll do that. I'll pack that. You let Jim take you. Here's the baby. He's 2. You take Johnny, and you and Jim, and y'all get somewhere, and then Jim will come back and get me. And she never saw her again. So Ellen and Jim, all good intentions, they go out into the street, and they're going to go and try to cross S Street. They're going to this big colonial 2-story that they think is strong enough to hold up in this storm. And they can't get across the street. The street is a raging torrent. They watch a woman try to cross, and there she goes. So now we've got several people standing there wondering, how am I going to get across to this nice big house that has 50 to 100 people already in it, but it'll be safe. And instead they go into a little 2-story house that's already been evacuated. Those people have gone across the street, which is unfortunate for them because the colonial house did not survive, and no one in that house survived. So they're in this house, and they're with other people, and she says about the window blowing out and the porch blows off, and then all of a sudden the whole house just collapses. One minute she's sitting in a chair and she's got the baby in her arms, and the next minute she's under the water and she doesn't know where the baby is. And she calls out to the other women there, help me, I'm losing the baby. And they are able to get him and get him back into her arms. But now the house is floating. They're able somehow it drifts into another house, and they climb through the window. And they say they thought she was a goner because she'd been hit in the head and she hadn't even realized that she was injured. They survive the storm. The water goes down. They emerge, and somehow they walk from here to here. And she doesn't really talk about what they saw or how long it took or anything like that. She says that she shows up on her aunt's doorstep, and her aunt is a very efficient woman. And they knock or whatever, and the aunt opens the door. And her aunt looks them over, and she says, well, where are the others? And Ellen says, Auntie, I do not know. And the aunt says, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And on the cassette, I heard Ellen's voice go very cold. And she says, that was the wrong thing to say to me at that time. And that was all she said about that. Of the known 14 people in her family, they were all gone. They were all lost. And they never found any of them except one, and that was her cousin. She did take Johnny, and she raised him, and he lived in Houston. And Ellen got married and lived until February of 1966. And it's the one story that stays with me all these years later. Now, when dawn arrived on Sunday morning, people began to realize the devastation. The people who were in here didn't really know what had happened out here yet. Ready? Oh my goodness. She just told me I have 5 minutes. I'm in trouble. We're going fast. So I've just got a couple slides with some pictures for you and some quotes. So George Hodson remembers that the spectacle on Tremont and Market Street beggars description. It was all swept. It was just all a debris. And if you tried to go out to that residential neighborhood, then you will see this wreckage, which was 100 feet deep and 25 feet high, and they had to cut a roadway to get in and out of the city. John Blagden, our temporary assignment guy, he said he had to go through all the wreckage of the buildings, the entire distance, but he couldn't find the place where he had been boarding because it was all swept clean. And if you didn't know, you would never believe this was a part of the city and a big neighborhood 24 hours before. And for reference point, that's the Bishop's Palace, and this is the old Sacred Heart Church, and this is St. Mary's Infirmary. Sacred Heart Church now is here. Mary Louise Bristol was a child, but she remembers after half of their house fell in, her widowed mother, who ran a boarding house, said, oh, well, God, why couldn't we have all gone with it? Because life had been such a struggle to her at the time. We were living in a 2-story house, and this is an actual picture taken from the area where Alice Block lived. This is Sacred Heart Church. The only thing that survives Sacred Heart Church that is in the current church today is the crucifix. This was the Bath Avenue Schoolhouse on 25th Street. I love that the desks are all bolted into the floor. And for many days, it was impossible for anyone to get out to their home. But 11 days after the storm, my parents made a trip. And I love this picture because look what she's wearing. Look how formally they're dressed in all of this weather. Now, before I run out of time, I'd like to tell you that you may have noticed I've not gone into any detail about the great loss of life. I think that the world is overburdened right now with the great loss of life. And recent events have just really been in the forefront. Things that I've read, things that I've seen this past summer. So I didn't want to go into any of those type of photographs. I didn't want to really bring up any of this, except to say that the Rosenberg Library, since the centennial, has documented 5,132 names of known people who lost their lives in the storm. The official record will be given as somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000. It is, and it remains, the deadliest natural disaster in the history of the United States, and I pray that it holds that title forever because I don't ever want to see anything like that ever again. I really don't have a lot of time to go into the rest of it, so I'll run through these. Galveston was completely isolated and cut off from the storm. And I will tell you this. On Sunday morning at 11 a.m., 6 men departed from a 20-foot steam launch that had survived. They arrived in Texas City, crossing the bay with all of its debris, and they waded in waist-deep water to Lamarck. They found a rail handcar, you know, the push ones, and they took that all the way up to League City, where they found a train, and the train took them into Houston. It took them 16 hours. They arrived at 3 a.m. and were able to cable the governor and the president that Galveston was alive and had survived. God bless Houston. Within an hour, 250 volunteers had mobilized and filled a railroad car with provisions, and they were already starting to equip a steamer with 100,000 gallons of fresh drinking water, which was desperately needed on the island. People came in from the island, and they gathered here at the county courthouse, and Hyman Block remembers that they were down the island people, and he said that they were very loud, made a lot of noise. Our veteran went down to City Hall, this is City Hall. It's gone. The rest of it was destroyed in Carla. He went down there and asked the chief of police, "Can I be of any service to you?" He said yes, wrote him out a commission as a sergeant, and sent him out to go and start establishing martial law. He raised and organized 2 companies of mixed militia, volunteers, and a troop of cavalry. And he noted that some of the best men in the city, business and professional, were in the ranks, and they worked as hard as anyone else. On Sunday afternoon, the businessmen and other citizens gathered in the Tremont Hotel, and the mayor held a meeting about 2 o'clock. They organized the Central Relief Committees to relieve the suffering and bury the dead. They elected 8 well-known, proven civic leaders to organize committees, to assign people and direct the operations. These committees included finance, labor, hospital, transportation, burials, buildings, correspondence, and public safety. They then divided the city into 12 wards, and they assigned a chairman to find a central store or a house in each ward where they could set up a commissary, and they could deliver food and other relief items. Hundreds of people spent weeks clearing away all of the debris. And then Houston relief started to arrive about this time. They brought in the Texas militia under General Scurry, and Thomas Scurry, Adjutant General. He arrived 5 days after the storm and took over the policing of the island. But Lloyd Failing remembers that they were ordered by the mayor to march and take every able-bodied man, white or black, met with, and force them at bayonet point to assist in the awful work. Our 15-year-old got caught up in that. He said, "I saw a lot of men starting small fires, and before I knew what had happened, I had been conscripted to help bury or burn the dead. And in less than an hour, I looked up and saw Colonel McCaleb, an officer of the local militia. He said to me, 'Harry, you're big enough, but you're too young to be doing this kind of a job.' And he wrote me out a pass and told me to go home, which I was awfully glad to do." Clara Barton arrived on September 17th. She was 78 years old. This would be the last American Red Cross disaster that she would personally oversee. The people, when she arrived, they clapped. They applauded. All the men came out. And the Central Relief Committee delegated all of the distribution of the supplies to her and the Red Cross group until they left the island November 14th. The whole world turned out, providing relief. This is actually, it says, the Philadelphia, North America, Galveston Relief Train. And these are some children waiting at a commissary, and I love the smiles on their faces, their barefoot feet, and their clothing, those hats, the bonnets, yes. So James Brown wrote, "As soon as the outside world heard of the sad affair, they sent provisions by the trainload. It's very pleasing to us all to hear, to read of the nations of the world responding to our wants, and proves conclusively that one touch of nature makes the whole world kin." Galveston was not giving up. They did rebuild, And those of you who understand this, their financial losses were $28 million, or over $1 billion in today's money. And rebuilding required a change in their government. Based on the success of the Central Relief Committee's ability to delegate and get the job done, they created and adopted the City Commission Plan. That's just a great poster. And that remained in place for about 60 years. And then we'll just go through these very quickly and we'll be done. I think we all know about the building of the seawall. That took 4 years. I love these pictures. It really gives you a point, right? When you know that it's 17 feet high because the storm surge was 15 feet. Then they did the grade raising. And that was where they raised all the homes all the way up to 17 feet at the seawall, and then they came down at a 2% grade to the wharf. And this is a great picture that really demonstrates, here's the marker, here's the house raised on stilts, and here's the same marker after, and there's the house no longer on stilts. The seawall was tested in 1915. The storm was as strong, possibly stronger than the 1900 storm. And because of the seawall, while there was damage, there was not a great loss of life. And the energy of the waves took the storm surge and just dissipated it. And we have had other storms that landed, and they will continue to strike Galveston. We know it to be a fact. And the most recent comparable storm in Galveston was Hurricane Ike in 2008. But ladies and gentlemen, that is another story for another time. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a wonderful job. I'm going to attempt to skip some of the stuff and get finished more quickly, so that if any of you have any questions for Shelly, y'all will be able to ask her that. One of the things that Jeffrey didn't mention with it as County Judge of Jefferson County, I have the dubious distinction of having the most disaster declaration of any county judge in Texas and any county administrator in the United States, which means that if any of you in here tonight voted for me, you should have voted for someone more lucky than me. A lot has changed in the last 125 years. We certainly, as a community, have had a lot of experience since 2000 with Edward, Gustav, Umberto, Ike, Rita, Harvey, and fortunately, in the last couple of years, we've been extremely blessed. As a matter of fact, I think if any of you have seen some of Greg Bostwick's posting, and he and I communicate several times a week. This is the first time in 114 years since 1911 that we have not had a storm impact the United States in either the Gulf or the Atlantic. So I count ourselves very fortunate, especially given that, well, I'll pass that up since, as you could see from some of the materials that Shelly went over, despite Dr. Klein's warnings, most of the people that were in Galveston were relatively clueless, having gone through previous storms and weathered them, thinking that this one was going to be no worse than the others. So we know that over the years, there were many shortcomings that existed at that time that we no longer have to face. We are able to become a much more resilient community because of a lot of technological advances that we've experienced over the years. The technological shortcomings that they had back then obviously were communication shortcomings. There was no wireless technology at that time. They were relying on telegraphs. And so the information was very slow to come in during that time. There was no wireless technology with the ships at sea that could have warned people of what was about to happen. There were no hurricane hunter planes that could actually fly into the hurricane and transmit back information about what was going on out in the eye of the storm and what kind of power it had. But today, the National Weather Service and National Hurricane Center are extremely, much more accurate than what they were even 30 years ago. So I will tell you that what happens as we have a storm entering the Gulf, sometimes it may be normally about a week beforehand. We start having twice daily briefings that go to 3 times a day, 2 or 3 days in advance. With Harvey, it meandered all around the Gulf and across Texas and back out in the Gulf. I've always told my wife that it's obvious that Harvey was aptly named as a man because he obviously didn't want to stop and get directions. But but the technology, the sophisticated equipment that's here now and available to the National Hurricane Center and National Weather Service has allowed them to increase the forecast certainty. So each of you, whenever you see a storm coming in, or Terry and all the others that are starting to advertise about the storms, they always have this cone that shows, and that's the cone of uncertainty, what we call it. And if you go back even into the 1990s, the average miss in that cone of uncertainty was 350 miles. And that's either way. So you've got a 700-mile swath of uncertainty in the 1990s, which is basically the entire Gulf. And today, we're at an average of a 90-mile miss, which is about a 180-mile cone, which makes it extremely difficult. I think the most difficult part of my job, and in Texas, the county judge is the emergency management director. And under Chapter 418 of the Texas Government Code, the county judge, we have a bottom-up system of emergency management response, is under the statute above the governor, and in my estimation gives the county judge many powers that I think are unconstitutional. I'm allowed after the entry of a disaster declaration to seize gasoline supplies, gun stores, liquor stores, to seize federal assets, something I don't think that I'm ever going to attempt to execute that power because I don't want to end up in federal prison. And the theory is that the cities come to the county, then when the county's resources are expired, that we then make a request from the state. Then when the state resources are expired, they make a request to the federal government for a presidential disaster declaration. It is probably the most difficult decision in the world, not in the world, but for me, in my world, to make a decision about an evacuation. You can either be, as county judge, a hero or a zero, depending on what happens. And because we have, even with significantly better technology these days, we still have that 180-mile swath of uncertainty. And the problem is that that's at 72 hours out. And 72 hours out before hurricane or tropical storm force winds reach the coast is when the decision has to be made about whether or not an evacuation is going to be called. The difficulty with it is there are 2 good scenarios and 2 bad scenarios. You can call the evacuation and the storm can come, in which case you're a hero. You call the evacuation, the storm doesn't come, you're a zero. You don't call the evacuation, the storm doesn't come, you're a hero. You don't call the evacuation, the storm comes, you're a zero. And but the most difficult part about it that I've learned since going to the county in 2007 is that the entry of an evacuation order requires that all of the nursing homes in our area and medical care facilities empty out and transport their patients to other areas. We're required to transport our prisoners in all of our correctional facilities outside of the area. There are many, many of those people who have died during the evacuation process over the years because they simply can't handle the stress of the move. And that's what weighs on me most whenever I'm trying to make a decision about that. Evacuations do have the force of law. You can arrest people for failing to heed that evacuation order. Obviously, we're not going to do that. We've already emptied out our jail. What would we do to go out and arrest somebody and bring them? I'm not going to keep them at the courthouse with me. So really the most important lesson to get out of it, and I've put some FEMA flyers out there about storm preparation. Encourage everybody to sign up for the STAN, the Southeast Texas Alerting Network. I encourage everyone to go to ready.gov and to take advantage of the resources that are available in there for storm preparation, which range from everything to making sure you have enough food and medicine and supplies, taking care of your pets and your valuable papers and so forth. So I've passed over a lot of things that I had made notes about that I wanted to talk about, but we're much more resilient today than we were then. We obviously, since the storms we've had over the last century, have much better building codes. We have firm maps, which are FEMA inundation rate maps, show flood zones. We have better building standards, and in the 70s they started the National Flood Insurance Program. That signals to me that I need to shut up so that y'all can ask Shelly some questions. But if a county wants their citizens to be able to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, you have to appoint a floodplain administrator. You also have to enforce floodplain rules. So there are base flood elevation concerns where you have to build your slab at or above a certain amount depending on where it falls in the flood inundation rate map. You have to use ties now on all of the framing of the house and a lot of other rules that apply to the construction of the home. At other times I talk, which I'm not going to do tonight, about our particular topography in Jefferson County and how over 95% of the county and parts of Chambers County and Liberty County flow into the Hildebrandt and Taylorsville watersheds, not capable of absorbing all the water that we had in a Harvey type of incident. So our move right now is we have spent over $240 million on coastal restoration to knock down hurricane storm surge, and over about $150 million on drainage projects is try to redirect the waters, particularly in Beaumont, particularly between the Elegante Hotel and Lamar University, from that Hildebrandt Taylor's watershed and over to the Neches River, which is able to handle it much better. So I could talk about these things for a long time, but I thank you so much for your attention, and I want y'all to have an opportunity to ask Shelly some questions. So thank you for having me.
All right, we do have some time for some questions. What I'm going to do, if you would raise your hand, we're going to have both of the speakers up there to answer any questions. I'm going to hand you the microphone so everyone can hear your question. Anyone have any questions for either of our presenters tonight?
This question is directed to Judge Branick. Lately, or I should say in the last few months, we've heard about developments in Washington, D.C., where reductions of resources that sound like they were applicable to the topic we're talking about, that perhaps they've been reduced. Can you Can you comment on that? Do you think we have what we need to keep us safe during the next big storm?
Use the microphone.
Okay, so we continue to have disaster recovery and what are called hazard mitigation grant program funding that comes to us for flood control projects. We are in the process of rebuilding the hurricane protection levee to new standards in Port Arthur for storm surge purposes. Here's one of the problems is when you get a Harvey, you've got a whole lot of rain going out, and you've got storm surge coming in, and they get in a battle at the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway between the Needmore Diversion Channel, the mouth of Taylor's Bayou, and the mouth of the Nature's River going out. But I will tell you that with respect to federal resources for disaster recovery, specifically individual assistance that we've seen in Ike, in Rita, and in Harvey, we will not likely see those in the future. We've seen those coming down since Rita. Up until Katrina hit New Orleans, we had never seen the Stafford Act, which was passed in 1988 and became effective in '89 at the federal level, which is what empowers FEMA to assist. We'd never seen the type of assistance to individuals. And then when Katrina hit, it was all over the news. It became a big political ball that people were tossing back and forth at each other. So as a result, the federal legislature did a supplemental disaster appropriations bill, the size of which they had never seen for any disaster previously. Shortly, 28 or however many days later, Rita hit our area, and of course, the Texas legislators in Washington said, well, you did this for Louisiana, you need to do it for Texas, and they did. And those federal dollars have paid for the rebuilding of almost every one of our county bridges, about 54 of them out of 56 in the aftermath of Rita, that many of which were in bad condition anyway. Now, we have seen in subsequent disasters that the amount of funding has gone down because it's just become, there are so many disasters, whether they're wildfires, mudslides, everything, that they have to push more of the responsibility back to the state. And so at the local level, I've seen that they have started to say, we're not going to fix these roads because we're going to classify these as minor arterials and major feeders, and those have to be taken care of by TxDOT. So I hope I in some way answered your question.
Thank you very much.
You mentioned that Galveston was the first city in Texas to get telephone service. Why were they first when they were out on an island?
The question is, why was Galveston the first city in Texas to have telephone service? I don't know the answer to that. I would guess because of the business headquarters, international and national headquarters that were on the island. So.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Yeah, do you have any information about the raising of Trinity Church, Episcopal Church in Galveston? I think it was Trinity Church, wasn't it?
I don't have specific information about Trinity Episcopal Church and how it was raised. I do know the story of how they raised St. Patrick's Catholic Church off Broadway and around 37th Street. And that was that they put, I forget how many jacks underneath that church. And the story goes that every man on the jack, they had a drum, and the drum would beat. And every time the drum beat the rhythm, they would turn a quarter turn, beat, quarter turn, beat, quarter turn. St. Patrick's Church was the largest, heaviest building that they raised for the grade raising.
We got one more question. We're going to get one more, final question right here.
I probably don't need the mic, I promise. How accessible are
So the question is, how accessible are the records that I used for the book? How accessible are they at the Rosenberg Library? The majority of them are available online today. In the photo of the anonymous letter, I right-click downloaded that right off of the website. So if you go to galveston-texas-history-center.com, sorry, I don't know what the .com is. Find the Rosenberg Library, follow the trail to the Galveston and Texas History Center, and then on the main page towards the bottom is a subject research heading, 1900 Galveston Storm. Go there, it'll lead you to where you need to go. And of course, they are open Tuesdays through Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Excuse me,
Yes?
yes. Oh, they get it. Galveston got telephone service, according to AI, first in Texas because A.H.B.E.L.O., publisher of the Galveston News, encountered Alexander Graham Bell's invention at the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exposition, immediately sought to install it in Galveston. 1878?
So for those who couldn't hear, he says that according to his AI Google search, I suppose, that Galveston got telephone service because the Galveston News owner, A.H. Below, who I think also started the Houston paper, saw Alexander Graham Bell's invention at a Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. I think. 1878.
Why didn't somebody call?
Ladies and gentlemen, can we get one more round of applause for our two speakers? Thank you so much for coming out this evening. We look forward to seeing you for our music, for our lectures. As we learned tonight, take care of yourself and take care of your neighbor. Thank you very much.